Without question, Don Malarczyk fought hard for his client, Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell just receiving the sentence of 15 years to life in prison for the murder of her mother, Brenda Powell. I want to bring in Don Malarczyk now. He's standing by with our team at the courthouse. Don, first of all, just want to commend you for the tremendous advocacy work that you've displayed throughout this whole process. Not an easy fight to fight, a tragic story which you've acknowledged from the outset with your client. This is one of those cases where there are no winners. No matter what the outcome would be, absolutely no winners. Brenda Powell is dead, can never be brought back, and Sidney Powell, not in a good place. Now she's heading off to prison. I want to start with your remarks at the sentencing. I saw you getting pretty upset after you heard the prosecutor asking for a particular kind of sentence. They were asking for 18 to life and then asking for the tampering charge to be run consecutively. That made you upset. Tell us why, please.
It really did. And here's why, Julie. You know, we go to trials and you hope to win, but you have to fight fair, you fight hard, and then you bring to the court the law and you are honest with them. And what really, really upset me when Mr. Stano stood up and said he was going to ask for consecutive time, and I think you saw the look on my face, and I looked over at Joe McAleese, the assistant prosecutor, who was a really good trial lawyer and a good human being, and he and I were shocked. We were shocked because that is exactly the opposite of what was represented to the judge in chambers earlier this week. I mean, Julie, you know, on a case like this, the attorneys are going to try to talk to the judge and get a sense of what the parties are going to recommend so you can anticipate what witnesses to bring before the court and what legal arguments to make. And for Mr. Stano to pull that stunt at the last minute was really unprofessional, and it upset me, and I think that showed. In the hallway, yes.
Oh, geez. You know, Don, you talked. The victims were trampled on, and what we may have to do, just because of the yelling, is perhaps somebody can usher that individual away. I just want to make sure you can hear me and I can hear you okay. Don, so you said in your remarks that the wishes of the victims were trampled on by the prosecution, and you referenced Marcy's law, how victims have rights and do have a say-so. And you know, and I always tell people, no matter how you feel about the case personally, don't get angry with the attorneys. The attorneys are just doing their job. They're just advocating for, you know, the parties that they're representing respectively. And here, it seems to me, and tell me, that what the family was saying to the prosecutors in those letters, in conversations all throughout this process, you're saying was essentially ignored, and the state did what it wanted to do here.
Yeah, Julie, that's absolutely right. And it wasn't only reflected in the letters, but it's been from day one. You know, I've been involved on this case since March 4th, 2020, the day after Brenda was killed, and I've reached out to the prosecutor repeatedly and asked them just to have a meeting with the family and listen to them, listen to the pain that they are experiencing, listen to what they're trying to accomplish with Sidney, listen to what Brenda would want. And those rights were ignored. You know, as you said, we have a constitutional amendment, Marcy's law, that says the prosecution must consult with the victims and consider their wishes. That doesn't mean they're going to do exactly what they're going to say, but I've never experienced anything like this in 30 years. We had a prosecutor, Mr. Stano, who stood up and said, you know, I'm going to be respectful of you, Mr. Powell. That same prosecutor subpoenaed Stephen Powell, the victim in this case, the surviving spouse, the father of Sidney Powell, subpoenaed him into court and then asked the judge to treat him like a hostile witness. That's not what we do in this system. And I know, you know, as a former prosecutor, your job as a prosecutor is not only just to secure a conviction, but to see that justice is done. And that wasn't done in this case. And I understand, you know, he fought hard at trial. But when the last opportunity, really the last opportunity to show some level of deference, some level of understanding, some level of insight into the suffering of the victims at sentencing, and simply follow their wishes or acknowledge their wishes to impose a minimum sentence, he couldn't do that. And this trial, unfortunately, pulled back the curtain that Mr. Stano cares about victims.
This is such a messy case, a complicated case, as you know, Don. I can't imagine how the Powell family feels. I mean, it's just like they've been victimized again and again and again, and how hard it must be for Sydney's father. You know, that's his child, but that was his wife he lost. I mean, just a horrible position to be in. And I know that the family has showed unwavering support for Sydney. We saw them, going to and from court with you and her. I've been very clear about how they felt about this from the outset, what they wanted. Today, it's my understanding they were there in the gallery. But Sydney,
Correct.
Though, separated from them today, of course, brought in as a prisoner, and she turned her back to them, Don. What was that about?
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because, I had met with Sydney for about 90 minutes on Tuesday night, and I said to Sydney, listen, Sydney, here's what's going to happen. Your family is going to be there, but the Summit County deputies, as all deputies do, their primary concern is safety. And they get upset when defendants who are going to be sentenced try to communicate with family. They don't want family trying to communicate or talk to someone who is there for court proceedings. This wasn't like the trial when Sydney was not in custody. And I said, Sydney, you're in the custody of the Summit County Sheriff's deputies right now, and we're going to do what they want us to do. So this wasn't a rejection at all by any circumstances of Sydney and her family. It was just a recognition that we have to follow the proper protocols and let the deputies know that we're going to do what we need to do for sentencing, and there will be time enough later for Sydney to continue to connect with her family. But that wasn't during these proceedings today.
Don, thank you for clarifying. So what comes next now? I know that you were, and I was flagging these things as I saw you making your record at trial, issues that may be appealable issues. So I wanted to ask you about that, Don, in terms of what comes next for her. You've laid the groundwork. Is the intention, I'm assuming, for her to take an appeal?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we really have some good arguments on appeal. As you said, one of the key issues in this case was whether or not we could the defense could bring in rebuttal witnesses. We heard from the state's expert, Dr. Sylvia Obradovich, on the last day of trial, the last witness before the jury. And she said some things that I noted on the record after she left the stand that our doctors would have absolutely disputed, that just weren't medically sound opinions and conclusions. And the judge unfortunately said we were not going to get that opportunity to present our experts in rebuttal. So the last witness that the state heard from went unchallenged. And I think that's a huge issue on appeal. And it's my belief and my expectation that that will grant us a new trial.
Mm-hmm. Right. I remember watching your voir dire of the state's expert, and they brought in someone who had never been qualified in any court of law, state court or federal court, to opine on insanity at the time of a homicide. And you even asked on any criminal offense, and it was never. So you
Right.
did a fine job laying that record, as you are a trial advocacy professor. I mean, you know what to do. I know our viewers were very complimentary of your advocacy work, Don, and it was a treat to watch you in trial. We get to see you as an analyst when you give analysis, as one of our frequent Court TV regular guests. But here, this was different. I mean, the pressure's on. You're in the trenches. You're dealing with a homicide. You're dealing with family who's upset, a client who's got a whole host of problems. Let's talk about that, too. In terms of what she's going to receive at the state hospital, is she going to be able to get the proper treatment for her schizophrenia?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I've been at every prison in the state of Ohio and a number of federal facilities, and as we know, they are seriously underfunded. So it's not a place where you can get top shelf quality mental health treatment. Fortunately, Governor DeWine in Ohio allocated some resources for Marysville facility, specifically where the women in Ohio are sent to prison for a mental health unit. There's 100 beds available. As we talked about at sentencing, the judge is very limited, and she doesn't have the authority to order Sidney Powell there. But if anyone needs to be treated in a mental health facility within the prison, it's Sidney Powell, and it's my hope and my expectation that she's placed in one of those beds.
Oh, certainly, Don. You know, I would imagine that the family's letters discuss that. Can you tell us specifically,
Yes.
what were the big asks from the family to the judge for today?
Yeah, there were about 30 letters from different members of the community, and it was a widespread cross-section of people who were family members of Sidney and Brenda, people who had spent a lot of time with the Powell family, and people who had worked with Brenda Powell. We got letters from teachers, from doctors, from lawyers, from nurses, from police officers, and they all said the same thing. The police officers who wrote said they've never seen anything like this in their entire career, where victims' wishes and rights are trampled upon. Doctors who worked with Brenda Powell and knew Sidney and knew Brenda said she is suffering from some severe mental illness and needs to be treated. And the theme with all of those letters was, please respect the family's wishes and impose a minimum sentence. That was universal. It was said over and over again, and it was a real plea for help to be heard. When these victims were ignored and marginalized and their rights were trampled upon, this was their opportunity, final opportunity, to request to be heard. And fortunately, we have a judge who took that into consideration. We have a great judge who allowed Sidney to leave the trial during certain really difficult periods. I think the judge understood how difficult it was going to be, and she did the right thing and imposed the minimum sentence.
Mm-hmm. The court certainly heard the victims. That is without a doubt.
Yes.
Hearing the court's imposition of sentence, that was the first thing I thought. This judge got it, understood the situation, did a fine job. And I have to say, you know, to you, Don, when we saw you, when you opened up with this case, you did a fine job in acknowledging what an angel Brenda Powell was, and really told the beautiful story about her life. And I think it's easy to lose sight of who our victims are in homicide cases. You try them, you know, every week. You know what it's like. It can be all about the facts, the evidence, but to make it really focused on the beautiful person that she was important. So her life was really very much brought to light in your advocacy work and the representation of her daughter. And please give the Powell family our best regards going forward. This has not been an easy process. We know for Brenda's mom, Brenda's husband, and we certainly hope that they will continue to receive whatever treatment they may be needing. Don, before we let you go, is there anything that we should be asking you that we haven't about this sentencing, about the trial process, about anything at all relating to Sidney Powell?
Sure. I think this trial showed that we still have a lot of stigma behind getting treatment for mental health. And the thing I want everybody to know, that mental health is real. And if you are feeling something, ask for help.
Yeah, ask for help. That is the truth. It's a real shame that she hadn't gotten help sooner or been diagnosed sooner. Just such a tragedy. Don Milarczyk, we hope you get some rest. We hope you get to take some time off after this. I said when this trial kicked off, and I'll say it again today at the conclusion, Sidney Powell could not have been in better hands. You represented her so extraordinarily well. Thank you for this interview, Don. Would love to have you back here as an analyst.